On a cold March evening in 2019, Seattle was enveloped in a damp haze that penetrated every nook and cranny of the suburban Ballard neighborhood. On this day, as dusk finally engulfed the city, the Seattle Police Department received a report from Lisa Grayson, a neighbor of couple Martha and David Larson. She stated that she had not seen David in weeks, and that his wife Martha had been acting strangely and avoiding talking about his whereabouts. Officers arriving at the Larson home on 11th Avenue smelled a slight chemical odor that intensified upon entering the garage. Martha greeted the officers in a reserved but confident manner. She claimed that David had gone on an extended work trip to South Korea and left her alone. During the conversation, however, the police noticed that Martha was nervous, and her story seemed elaborate but unnatural. Suspicion grew. Officers learned from neighbors that Martha and David did not have an active social life, but in the last months before David's disappearance, there were frequent arguments in the house, audible through the walls. Neighbors also noticed that in the weeks before his disappearance, David had said that he planned to get a divorce and leave the house. Police made the decision to search the house and its surroundings. The bedroom and living room looked familiar, but a recent renovation was found in the first-floor bathroom with freshly painted walls and new tiles, which caught the detective's attention. Inspector John Mills noted that the chemical odor grew stronger closer to the garage. Officers noticed garage shelves that were filled with cement packages, tools, and large plastic containers. Detectives also noticed that there were traces of fresh grout on the concrete floor of the garage. Police officers decided to use GPR to check the concrete base for anomalies. After careful analysis, they found differences in the density of the concrete layer in the center of the garage, indicating a recent pour. Convinced of the seriousness of the situation, detectives ordered the concrete in that location to be broken up. When workers broke through the layer of cement, they found a large plastic wrap soaked in blood underneath. Upon further dissection, they came across a human body wrapped in polyethylene and hidden under a layer of concrete. The body was in a state of severe decomposition, but it was immediately obvious from the height and clothing that it was David Larson. The remains were taken to the laboratory for forensic examination. The pathologist found David had multiple blunt force traces to the head and fractured ribs, indicating brutal violence. The preliminary forensic report indicated that David died of head trauma and his body was hidden under concrete shortly after his death. In parallel, detectives examined the Larsons' bank accounts and phone records. They determined that Martha Larson had purchased 20 bags of cement, plastic wrap, and construction tools from a local construction store a few days before his alleged disappearance. The checks were made payable to her credit card, and surveillance footage captured her face. Police analyzed her phone and social media messages. In recent months, Martha had often discussed the difficulties of her marriage with her friends, and mentioned that she was afraid she would lose the house in the event of a divorce. This added motive to the crime. Martha feared that divorce would deprive her of her property, especially given David's intentions to leave the family. Forensics also confirmed traces of chemicals found on the bathroom floor and in the garage. These substances were used to clean biological traces, indicating an attempt to carefully hide evidence. During the investigation of David Larson's murder case, detectives began gathering evidence pointing to the involvement of his wife, Martha. Experts reviewed all of the family's records and financial transactions, as well as analyzed calls and messages received from her phone over the past several months. The first suspicions were aroused by the fact that all major purchases related to concrete, tools, and plastic wrap were made to Martha in a short period of time. Detectives discovered that the receipts for the cement, shovels, and plastic containers were dated a week before David's alleged disappearance. After carefully reviewing camera footage from the construction store, detectives saw Martha drive up to the store in the family SUV and load bags of cement into the trunk herself. A couple days prior to this purchase, she had also purchased heavy-duty construction gloves, stain remover, and several sets of heavy-duty plastic bags. Police decided to check the Larsons' internet search history on her personal devices. Cybersecurity experts found that 2 weeks before the murder, Martha had searched for information on how to mask decomposition odors and do concrete work at home. She had also visited several websites on how to financially divide property in a divorce. Researching these materials provided important evidence to support the assumption of her motive. Meanwhile, forensic investigators continued to examine evidence collected from the house. Clothing found under the concrete layer retained traces of blood that matched David's samples, as well as small particles of cement and soil identical to those found on the garage floor. Experts speculated that Martha may have moved her husband's body on a cart that was usually parked in a corner of the garage, which also had traces of cement on it. A thorough inspection of the cart revealed that particles of hair and traces of David's blood were left on its wheels, as well as microsamples matching the composition of the concrete in the area where the body had been hidden. Detectives also interviewed the family's closest relatives and friends to determine the nature of the relationship between the couple. Neighbors and acquaintances described the couple as withdrawn, with no active social contacts. However, several people noted that quarrels and yelling had been heard at the Larson home recently. One neighbor, Mark Simmons, recalled how David approached him in the parking lot about a month ago, and in conversation mentioned that he felt trapped and was thinking about divorce. Mark noticed that David seemed depressed, but didn't go into details. Additionally, the police investigated the family's financial situation. It turned out that David, an engineer at a large technology company, had recently received a substantial bonus, which was partially invested in a joint account between the couple. The account contained a large sum of money as well as assets, including a house and land. This information strengthened the theory of a possible financial motive for the murder, as divorce could have meant that Martha would have lost a significant amount of property. While examining personal and business correspondence, detectives discovered letters that David had sent to his attorney in the days before his death. In these letters, he consulted on the terms of the prenuptial agreement and the specification of his rights to the property. David expressed concerns that his spouse might try to challenge the division of property in her favor. These letters were key evidence in the theory of motive related to financial hardship and the threat of divorce. Forensics showed that the gloves found at the crime scene contained minor traces of sebum that matched Martha's DNA, as well as traces of chemicals identical to those found at the crime scene. The gloves also contained microparticles of paint that matched the composition of the paint on the bathroom walls. Forensic investigators hypothesized that Martha was attempting to use the gloves to cover her tracks when she struck her husband or covered his body. After confirming a financial motive and Martha's DNA matches on the gloves, detectives decided to increase surveillance on her. Meanwhile, the investigative team focused on checking her cell phone data. Experts noticed that in the days leading up to David's disappearance, Martha had been actively seeking information on how to cure concrete quickly, as well as how to cover her tracks at the crime scene. GPS data showed that she had made several visits to construction stores on the outskirts of Seattle, and her car had stopped at suspicious locations, including deserted sections of parking lots and storage areas, away from surveillance cameras. Meanwhile, the crime investigation took an increasingly serious turn. In analyzing the CCTV footage, it was possible to reconstruct a chronology of Martha's movements on the day police believe David was killed. The video showed her pulling up to the construction store early in the morning, shopping, loading materials into the trunk of the SUV, and then driving toward their home. About 3 hours after that, her vehicle left the house again, heading toward an abandoned warehouse complex on the south side of town. Detectives decided that the area could be key to the investigation and sent forensic investigators there for a detailed examination. One of the dusty CCTV cameras installed in the warehouse captured a scene of Martha's SUV entering the area and stopping at the end of the far warehouse row. At first, forensic investigators couldn't figure out why she would want to stop her car in that spot, but then they found remnants of concrete and small fragments of construction debris identical to those in the Larsons' garage. Experts speculated that Martha had probably planned to leave the body there, but for some reason changed her mind. Back at the main crime scene, forensic investigators further analyzed the cement pad in the garage. They found traces of impurities underneath the concrete, indicating the use of binder additives to speed up the setting of the mixture. In addition, small metal fragments had been added to the mortar, used to reinforce the structure, which was quite unusual for a domestic application. This once again confirmed that Martha was intentionally reinforcing the concrete to create a strong barrier to conceal the body. At the same time, psychologists and analysts began to compile a psychological profile of Martha. They studied her behavior after the alleged murder and found clear signs of indifference. Specialists noted that Martha did not try to file a missing persons report for her husband, despite the fact that he had not been home for several days. She also did not contact his friends or coworkers to inquire about his whereabouts. This behavior heightened suspicions that Martha had carefully planned her crime and had no regrets after carrying it out. Detectives also noticed financial manipulation by Martha shortly after David's disappearance. She had transferred a large sum of money from an account they shared to her personal account in what appeared to be an attempt to secure herself before the divorce proceedings began. Shortly thereafter, she filed an application with the bank, requesting that certain joint accounts be closed and assets transferred solely in her own name, explaining that David had allegedly abandoned her and left for an unknown destination. These steps reinforced the police's belief that the murder was planned in order to gain control of the family's financial resources. Further analysis of the financial data led to an interesting finding. A few days before David's disappearance, Martha's account had received a large transfer from an unknown source. Detectives began to investigate where the funds might have come from. After additional checks, it turned out that the transfer was made from the account of a shell company that was engaged in real estate investments. Documents associated with the company indicated that its actual owner was a close acquaintance of Martha's, a person with whom she was in regular contact via encrypted messages. Detectives searched Martha's home, where they found several records and checks confirming that she had indeed received money from this acquaintance. Through further questioning, they determined that this man, Thomas Wilkinson, had helped her put together a financial plan and also advised her on legal issues related to the division of assets. However, it is unlikely that he was aware of Martha's real intentions. It is more likely that she concealed her plans from him, using his advice to justify further action. The investigators realized that the evidence gathered against Martha was compelling, but a guaranteed conviction required conclusive proof of her involvement in David's murder. The forensics team returned to the crime scene, focusing their attention on the concrete pad in the garage. They decided to do some final samples to check the depth of the layer and identify any traces that may have been left under the hardened concrete. After a few hours of work, they were able to find remnants of organic tissue under the concrete, presumably belonging to David. Since this needed confirmation, some of the material was sent to the lab for DNA analysis. The results were ready a few days later and confirmed. The remains were indeed David Larson's. This discovery allowed the investigation to move forward. Armed with a warrant, detectives conducted a full search of Martha's home and car, seized her electronic devices, bank records, and insurance reports. Among other things, they found encrypted messages she had exchanged with Thomas Wilkinson, which definitively confirmed her financial and psychological preparation for the crime. Police suggested that Thomas had no knowledge of the impending murder, but that his advice had been used for probate and property division, which he had actively assisted with. Investigators also discovered another curious detail. Martha had taken out a $1 million life insurance policy in David's name just a few months before his disappearance. Moreover, she made a lump sum payment to avoid monthly installments, which attracted the attention of the insurance company. She explained to the insurance representatives that her husband was a high-stress person, and therefore insurance was an important element of their future financial plan. On the day David went missing, Martha submitted a request for payment to the insurance company, stating that David had disappeared under mysterious circumstances and would likely never return. Detectives decided to conduct several in-depth interviews with David's family and friends to find out who else might have been privy to their family's affairs. Numerous acquaintances of David confirmed that he had become withdrawn and nervous in the months before his death. One friend noted that David had complained of financial pressure from his wife and had even considered filing for divorce. This information supported the police version that the motive for the murder was not only greed, but also the desire to avoid the upcoming division of property. After obtaining the necessary information, investigators charged Martha with first-degree murder. In her first interview, she recanted her confession, claiming she had nothing to do with her husband's disappearance. She claimed that they were having normal marital problems, but nothing more than that. However, when the prosecutor presented the court with evidence that included DNA analysis results and reports discussing the financial aspects of her plan, Martha began to show signs of alarm. At the first court hearing, the prosecutor advanced the theory that Martha had pre-planned the murder in order to gain possession of David's assets and avoid divorce proceedings in which she risked losing a significant amount of assets. Detailed evidence and witness testimony, as well as an analysis of her actions after her husband's death, created a complete picture of a premeditated and brutal crime. Marta's lawyer tried to justify her behavior by arguing that her actions were motivated by stress, but none of the arguments could shake the evidence gathered. The financial manipulations, the discovery of video camera footage of her actions in construction stores, and the technical data on the location of her phone and car all spoke of a well-thought-out and cold-blooded plan. In the closing argument, the prosecutor emphasized that Martha, even after the murder, continued to try to deceive others by texting and pretending that David had simply left the family. The records of her actions in construction stores and the purchase of special materials finally supported the prosecution's case. The court found Martha guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without parole.